we are probably two of the only businesses in town that have mandatory randomized drug testing for staff. They're counted in what we call program admin costs. So there is indirect admin costs, which at our agency is 15%.
Hey guys, Jesse Peone here with the Salem Business Journal Podcast. And today I am with
Jimmy Jones. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Action Agency here in Salem.
And DJ Vincent. I get to serve as the pastor and director of Church at the Park.
Welcome in, guys. I appreciate you being here.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Real quick, I do want to thank my sponsors. Thank you to Hotel Salem and Compass Visuals for sponsoring the podcast. Appreciate you guys and making this possible. So thank you. Now, gentlemen, so this whole podcast came about because DJ, you and I did one where we were talking about Church at the Park.
Yes.
And in this conversation, we were talking about a lot of the misinformation around the homelessness problem and around some of our homeless organizations and nonprofits that deal with the homeless situation. And in this conversation, we were talking about the role of Church at the Park and where you fit in to the issue of homelessness. And from what I remember from the conversation, just so I could set the stage a little bit, was we were talking about what's often talked about in like philosophy and ethics conversations. Like a lot of old school ethics guys would use the metaphor of like, people floating down a river. And if people are floating down a river, are you responsible to stop and help them out, or do you keep walking?
Right.
Or if you do step in to help people out of the river, if more people keep floating down this river, at what point do you leave the river to go feed your family and your kids and deal with your life? Or are you obligated to stay there and continue helping people out of the river? And in this analogy, what we said was Church at the Park, you're positioned at the end of the river, at the bottom, pulling people out of the river. So people who are already homeless, Church at the Park's role is to take these people that are homeless and help them get out of the river. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's very accurate. We exist to, meet the needs of those who have already become unsheltered. So there is this reality that we want to partner with everybody in the community. And so, for instance, I think we would say our school district, they are an educating organization. They're also maybe the biggest prevention organization in our community. And yet we interface with them in their McKinney-Vento program when they discover that a youth has become homeless. And they reach out to us around how we can come around that family. And so that is an intervention when a lot of what they're trying to do is prevent that from ever being the case.
Yeah. And so just to clarify, using the same metaphor, right? The school district would be at the beginning of the river, preventing people from falling into it to begin with.
Good.
Correct?
Good.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not very smart, so I have to like symbolize things to.
Oh, metaphors, if you want to change the world, maybe change the metaphor.
That's deep. That's a good one, DJ.
Yeah. Well, we exist with this metaphor of a table.
Yeah.
And we believe we're trying to create a table of love and acceptance where everyone in the community is welcome at that table. And sometimes people don't feel welcome. So then our people and organization will literally go and stand beside those who aren't accepted or don't feel they're accepted until we've expanded the circle and the table to include them.
Correct. Wow. I like that one. That's a pretty good metaphor. So the reason why we went into this conversation and why we wanted to come back again was because I think we were discussing how there was a lot of confusion in the community about Church at the Park's role because we've heard and you've seen articles about the industry of homelessness.
That's right.
Right. And that's something that like we've even written about once or twice about how like it's crazy how much money we've been dumping into this thing and the problem's not getting any better. And
it's getting worse in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And so like what happens with that is a lot of people look at it and they're like, well, who is this money going to? And then they see the organizations that are helping with the problem. And while there are some instances of fraud, right, there's also a lot of organizations that are really good. And so the question is, how do we decipher between the two? It's like if you're dating people when they cheat and someone cheats on you, how do you trust the next person that you're dating, or how do you know they're not going to cheat on you? Right. It's kind of the analogy there. And so what we wanted to talk about for this one was the beginning of the river. So not the end goal where we're taking people out of the river. Right. But what we want to talk about is, how is homelessness continuing to become a problem? Who's in charge of making sure people aren't falling in the river? And then as a community, where should we be looking or directing funding towards to ensure that people aren't falling in the river to begin with?
That's right.
Does that make sense?
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay. What are your thoughts?
So I'm from the South, so I love metaphors, and I particularly love this metaphor because it allows us to talk about the many different populations that we somehow, unfortunately, lump under this title of homeless, right? Because it is really many different circumstances and situations that lead people into this condition. So our agency does much of the same work that DJ does in slightly different ways, but work very closely with Church to Park and in alignment with them. We also, and I would say even more than our street homeless work, we spend a lot of time on homeless prevention. So homeless prevention is simply the idea that we find the people in the community who statistically, based on their current situation, are most likely to end up homeless, especially people who are currently in rental housing and are struggling in this economy to be able to afford to pay the rent. And we provide them with financial assistance to keep from falling into homelessness. Now, about 10 years ago, the idea that homeless organizations ought to be committing the majority of their resources to prevention was somewhat controversial, because that prevention effort was never meant to be an ongoing subsidy. It was never meant to be for 24 months or 12 months. It was usually emergency assistance, maybe 3 months.
Yeah, like if someone loses their job, then how can we catch them as they're falling and then help them stand back up again?
Exactly. So emergency assistance for somebody who lost their job, or somebody who was injured, or just any number of things that people couldn't foresee. Now, the skepticism and criticism of that approach was always, well, if you are only providing 3 months of assistance, how are they going to solve their problems for the other 9 months? And if they could solve their problems for the other 9 months, why can't they solve their problems for those 3 months? So you kind of got stuck in this logical loop that led people into this very critical, even people who are into work, and it led people into this very critical analysis around prevention. So rental costs in Salem Kaiser have gone from around $700 for a 2-bedroom apartment to something close to $1,500, $1,600 currently for the same apartment, just 6 or 7 years later. And the biggest driver into homelessness these days isn't drug addiction. It isn't mental illness. It's simply the lack of people's ability to afford their rent. So we have an economic factor out there that is driving more and more people into homelessness. And usually it doesn't look like, they don't fail to pay their rent one day on a Monday and show up in Wallace Marine on a Tuesday, right? It doesn't really happen that way.
How does it happen?
So usually what happens is folks have to vacate their apartment. They go and stay with a cousin or their mom for a week or two, and that doesn't work out. So their social support network isn't quite as robust as what it would have been 50 years ago when all of us lived much closer together, family. And they end up staying in their car. And then for whatever reason, weeks go by, months go by, and their financial situation doesn't improve. Maybe they lose their job because they can't get to work because the car breaks down. And then eventually they can't pay the insurance on the car. Car gets towed, and then they're in a tent. So that's the arc of that. Now, most people who enter at the beginning of that particular part of the river pull themselves out. They swim to shore, using that analogy. The trick is identifying the ones who are going to be swept downriver in that analogy and helping them first to prevent them from becoming homelessness, to stabilize the household as much as you can, and to so that you can allow the people who can save themselves to do so. You don't squander resources on people who probably would have been able to solve their own problems. And you focus the resources where they're going to be most successfully employed to prevent the growth of a larger homeless population. So during the course of the pandemic, Jesse, and this may surprise you, the amount of state and federal money spent in Oregon on homeless prevention was about $1.4 billion.
Before the pandemic?
During the pandemic. So from 2020 through 2025, July of 25, it was about $1.4 billion in state and federal dollars that went into preventing homelessness. Now that helped
from the beginning of the pandemic to now.
From the beginning of the pandemic to last summer.
To last summer.
Yeah, to last summer.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a huge amount of money.
What did it go towards?
It almost all of that went toward rental assistance for people who couldn't or stated that they couldn't afford their apartment for the most part. Now, there are a certain percentage of it that's getting shaved off. Part of the conversation, there are public concerns around, the most common language there we hear is the homeless industrial complex, right? This idea that organizations like ours or organizations that are serving the poor or serving the homeless are in some ways financially profiting off these grants and things of that nature. The idea that not enough assistance is getting to the people themselves. But there are program delivery costs, right? In terms, we have to have caseworkers to work with the families, not only to write the check, so to speak, literally, but also to connect them to other services so that they are able to be stable and self-sufficient on the backside of that. So that's typically around 20 to 25% of the total pool. We could cut it even further, I will tell you. But when we did that during the pandemic,
and those caseworkers and stuff, I just want to touch on that real
quick.
Those caseworkers and stuff, are those counted towards your admin costs?
They're counted in what we call program admin costs. So there is indirect admin costs, which at our agency is 15%. And that's, paying for HR, finance, IT, all of those things. And then there's program delivery cost, the money that we pay to program managers, to individuals working with homeless families and things of that nature to provide the services. Yeah. And in a different analogy, all that money kind of stays in the community because they take that money and they go pay rent, they go buy groceries and those sorts of things.
So I have a question for you on this, before we move on, for both of you, actually.
Great.
Because, so I have a lot of experience with the school system, as you may know. And one of the things that's really interesting, is when you look at the numbers of how much of the dollars going into the school system goes into the classroom. It gets spent on the classroom. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily in the classroom itself, but it's on the kids, focused on the kids in the classroom. How much of this money touches these kids that we're trying to educate versus how much gets stuck in the admin?
Good.
So
the true admin. Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
A lot of my experience, especially with legislation, policy, and government work, has to do with education. With my role, on the school board and with the Oregon School Boards Association. And one of the things that I always find really interesting when we're glancing at the performance of a school or how financially responsible we believe that they're being with our dollars is one of the biggest measurements people care about is how much of this money is going back into the classroom. Now, even in the classroom, right, there's the direct costs of the actual teachers,
right,
and the assistants within the classroom. And then there's books, that sort of thing. But then there's admin costs that are kind of associated with it, but not directly, like a janitor,
right,
or a librarian, or a PE teacher, which are people who are actually PE teachers actually have classes, but a librarian or a janitor would kind of be like an admin cost in a way but they do directly. We need them there to help with the school, right?
Right.
And then there's the admin, which are just the people, the actual admin, which are the people who manage the principals and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah. I'll jump in and start with Church at the Park.
Okay.
Because, we're focused, simple, 5 shelters.
Yes.
So 15% admin cost, making sure we're a compliant organization with HR, finance, leadership, then on the ground support of, a physical shelter space that is safe and supported and has all the right guest services with staff who are doing navigation and 24-hour staffing. So our basically program support is then 65%. And then you've got another, 20% to work with. 10% of that is going to housing focused support for those participants to break through barriers and get into housing. And then 10% of it is, like you say, the maintenance team and the infrastructure, the utilities of the site, the operational cost.
Correct.
So the operational cost is not as much as the human cost. I love your connection to the school. Yeah. Our main cost for the school district is teachers.
Correct.
And so the main cost for homeless services to work is people.
Well, and I guess so my question is just to make sure I nail down the answer. How much of your budget for salary costs is admin specific? So not dealing with the people who are physically there running the shelter for the homeless folks or helping them get their jobs, that sort of thing.
Good.
But how much of your budget is admin itself?
15%.
So for our situation, we're a little bit larger organization, and we are working on anti-poverty work beyond housing and homeless services. So this year, for example, we have 600 employees across Head Start, energy and weatherization, Arches, all of those program components. And we have a budget of around $70 million. So for us, we can use economy of scale to get a little smaller than that. So we're at about 12% that isn't that true admin. The other 88% is either direct financial assistance or program delivery costs in terms of, in using the educational analogy, people who touch the classroom in that sense. So the eviction prevention numbers are a little bit more interesting. So it's about 10% true admin there. And then around 20% program admin in terms of program delivery. And then the rest of it is all direct financial assistance. So it's really important to have those people who are working with the homeless clients, people who are in need of prevention assistance in particular. So our experience with the pandemic was quite remarkable when it comes to prevention. It was, I think, the federal rental assistance program, ERA, as they called it, will go down as the biggest fraud-ridden program in American history. And the reason I say that, because the amount of attempted fraud was exceptionally high. So we would get people, we would get people applying for rental assistance who were using identifications that might be a passport with Oregon misspelled, for example, Oregan. We got driver's license with people who took their driver's license pictures in tuxedos. We got driver's license pictures with folks with no arms. So there was a massive amount of fraud coming from out of state, coming from out of country in certain cases, trying to take advantage of the fact that huge millions and millions of sums. So we spent a lot of time in sort of fraud prevention. Efforts there too. So we had multiple stages in which we were checking for fraud, going through all that.
And you guys specifically were checking for fraud, which means probably across the country that was happening everywhere.
It was happening everywhere.
Dang. How much of it do you think ended up getting frauded?
10% minimum.
Yeah. Well, let's talk.
It's a huge amount.
Yeah.
We're talking billions of dollars put into that program nationally.
How much do you think was put into it nationally?
I'd have to go back and check that number, but I would say that probably 10% of every federal dollar spent in that program ended up in the hands of people who shouldn't have got it.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it was awful. And so
how did you guys prevent that from happening? How much do you think that you?
So we spent. I would say it's very small, and I'll tell you why. Yeah. So we spent somewhere around $42 million on Mary and Polk homeless families to keep them in their homes over the course of the pandemic, all the way up to 2025, through a variety of different programs.
Do you know how many families you helped?
Probably close to 8,000. It was quite a bit. And so what we did was when we first got that contract from the state, we said, none of our normal systems are going to work with a sum this large, right? So over on Church Street, we leased a building which basically became a call center. So we had frontline staff talking to the clients who were asking for rental assistance. And then they would pass off the information to a program manager who sat down and reviewed all of the records. They would actually run through county tax records to make sure that the person who owned the apartment complex or the housing unit or whatever was legally and lawfully registered as the appropriate owner. So we did a lot of fact checking behind the scenes on those sorts of things. And then after it left the program, it went over to my finance staff. We did another check on it. So we caught 95% probably. There's always going to be a few that get through, but incredibly, skilled people at that sort of thing. But I would say the generic fraud attempts and the sort of shotgun approaches, most of it was grabbed. So I do think that was, a lot of money that probably should have been more carefully watched over that. If you look at the audit of Oregon Housing and Community Services over those years, they couldn't demonstrate to the state that they could prove that all the money went to eligible clients. So there was this gap of around, $8 to $10 million that they just couldn't account for. So, there was a lot of problems back then. So part of that cost for program delivery is also a cost of, ethically making sure that the public's money, which is financing this sort of stuff, is being used properly.
And what do you guys do? And you touched on that a little bit, but overall, how you do. So in that situation, first of all, that's nuts.
It is.
That is crazy.
It's wilder than anybody knows. Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to, if you have any photos.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I would love to do an article on that so that people can see, like, dude, that, because that's a crazy thing.
It is.
And like, I think it would make people feel like, it's more transparency. I think it's better. And if people could see like any of the photos of someone like in a tux on this ID, like
I would be happy to give you the photo of the guy in the tux. We'll redact the address because there was probably the address of somebody who was
a real person,
real address, but it was everything else was fictional.
Yeah. If we could get like a couple examples of
these, no problem.
Like, hey, here's some who like got submitted into our own community.
Right.
Like that's nuts. Because we always think of it as like the industrial complex, and it's always this pie in the sky.
Right.
As opposed to this has just happened like here.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
but what do you guys do? What do your organizations do because you don't just have that one program. That's just one piece of this whole deal. So what do you guys both do in your organizations to ensure that fraud doesn't happen between like vendors that you work with or people coming to, be in the program? Or how do you ensure fiscal accountability?
Yeah, we'll start over here on the simple side of life, where again, when you have 5 physical shelter locations, when you're serving a population who essentially presents themselves as physically unsheltered, the big reality for us that maybe people don't realize is all of our dollars are reimbursement. So like we literally have to have working capital. We spend the money on staff, on services. We have to document everything and have a receipt process for everything, of which then we go through an audit, and then we go through a state fiscal monitoring for all of those dollars that, we already had to kind of submit that this was a legitimate expense to get reimbursed, but then they go back over it again every year. And so again, we're not working with people who, again, we are here to talk about prevention because I am a huge advocate for more rental assistance, shallow rent subsidies to keep people from becoming homeless. But we work with people who are physically in front of us. So we don't have to worry about being,
duped by
someone who wants to stay at the shelter, but actually runs a big internet business and has a mansion in West Salem.
That's fair. That's fair, actually.
So all the things DJ said for his operations are true for ours as well. So we have an annual single audit that's conducted by
are you guys
highly
also
reputable.
Paid reimbursed by reimbursement?
Almost entirely. So in this model, basically how this works is we get a contract from the government to do a thing, right? Okay. So we design the work, we implement the work, we incur the expense.
Is it usually the feds or the state or both?
Both in our case. We incur the expense, and then we apply for reimbursement with backup documentation. So it's almost never the case that we get the money up front and then sort of just use it however we want to. It's basically the government issues a promise to pay based on, this is the work we want you to do, the scope of work, but also these are the expectations we have for you applying for reimbursement. So we have a financial interest, obviously, in making sure that everything we do is reimbursable by the state. So, our finance office is about 15 people. And so we make sure that all the vendors that we work with are, in the Oregon business database. We make sure that they haven't been disbarred from certain activities. We sometimes seek references. Any amount above $25,000, we will go through a procurement process for. So people have to submit bids for that. So we run a lot of construction projects. We operate 7 shelters in the region, including 2 Project Turnkey motels that we own.
Where are the shelters at?
Sure. So the old Super 8 motel on Hawthorne, that's now the Arches Inn. So that's a 75-room homeless shelter. The old Capitol Inn and Suites over on Fisher, that's now the Arches Lodge. That is another 75-room motel. We don't own any property yet on either one of those. We operate the Navigation Center over on Mission and 22nd. That's a partnership with the city of Salem. That's 75 more beds. On Center Street, we operate what we call the Arches Nest, which is a 36-bed facility for families. And that just started up this year. The first mom we housed out of that was a woman who was referred to us by St. Anne Hospital. And she was living in her car with 3 minor children under the age of 10. They were fleeing DV and their windows had been busted out. So we got them in a shelter and we've already got them housed. They're in their own units tonight. So we operate that shelter. We operate 2 runaway and homeless youth shelters, one in Monmouth. Just recently got approved to expand to 10 beds, and one.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's David's house,
Yeah.
And Taylor's house here in Salem, which is another 10 beds. So that's how many. What did I leave? Oh, in Woodburn, we operate a kind of hybrid shelter up there, which is a mixed tent and indoor model at the request of the city to do that up there.
Interesting. So I have all sorts of questions.
Absolutely. Okay.
So, well, I guess my first question is, what percentage of your beds are full every night?
So it depends on the shelter you're talking about.
Yeah.
So the Nest, the family shelter, totally full tonight. The Lodge, all 75 rooms are full.
Mm-hmm.
The Inn, we've only got 1 floor of that open because that floor, the other 2 floors have been under construction. We have federal and state investment in there to modernize that. So we put an elevator in there because most of our clients there have mobility challenges. They just can't climb the stairs. So we got an elevator we put in. We're filling in the swimming pool. We're going to put a commercial kitchen out there. So this has been a 2-year process of renovating this, patching together funds to get that done. All of the other shelters that we operate, with the exception of the youth shelters, I would say are 90 to 95% full all the time. The youth shelters are not, because the purpose of the youth shelter is not to keep people for long term, is to get them reconnected with a safe destination as quickly as possible. So we want those beds to flip fast. So we've always got people coming in and coming out of those locations.
Yeah. So I want to lean into this question and make sure we're doing education that both our beds and the beds at Community Action, they are not just night by night, recheck in every day. Yeah. And that is the reality at UGM. So people may have a different set of expectations. Like you get the bed that night and, you go about your life and you may or may not get that bed again. To have the right expectation of Church at the Park and our 5 shelters, 300 beds is you agree to the expectations and how we're going to work together, and we recertify monthly. And so last year, those 300 beds served over 600 people, average stay with us just over 6 months. Yeah. And then 50% of those folks launching to permanent destinations. And so this reality is, if you look at our stats month by month, more people stayed at every shelter than there were beds. That's because we have some people moving out, some people coming in. Yep, and so just next door to us here, we've got those 80 beds. Last month, we served 88 people with those 80 beds. And our wait list, we have a wait list for every shelter. And so to give you an idea, we had the opportunity to serve those 600 folks last year. 1,900 people applied.
Wow.
They were in the queue wanting to be in one of those non-congregant shelter beds that are safe.
People applied?
Yes.
So these are people who are homeless?
Those are people who, through partners and our own outreach, applied and were in the queue to be sheltered in terms of they wanted a spot.
But the confusing part of this sometimes is every single one of those persons qualified, right?
Correct.
Almost all of them anyway, as homeless.
Yes.
People get too caught up in using the point in time count as a way to determine how many people are homeless in the community. It is a snapshot of that moment. Over the course of the year, many of those will leave homelessness. Others folks will come in. Yeah. So if there are 2,500 people, let's say, in a community like this, you might well see 5,000 or more that are homeless at some particular point in time during the year, coming in and out of the system at times. So it's always much larger than the actual pit count number if you're looking at an annual impact.
Yeah.
So we have 354 beds. We can open emergency warming facilities to do another 150 when the weather is poor. Our referral mechanisms are a little bit different in the sense that the types of shelters we operate are tied to purposes. So like DJ, we refer to them as transitional shelters. They are not night-by-night beds. People are enrolled in a program when they come in. So the Arches Lodge over on Fisher, That is mostly filled up with homeless veterans. So that comes to us through that VA referral process in a lot of cases, grant per diem, that sort of thing. We also operate a program called Shelter Care Plus at several of those shelters, which is basically an agreement with local hospitals. If they have a homeless client who they need to discharge for various reasons, but it's not really safe for them to go back outside. They need a place to stay warm and dry and recover, wound vacs, and all of that sort of thing. They can basically give us a prescription for shelter for that person, just like you would go to the pharmacy. The pharmacy to get a prescription filled. They can give us a prescription for shelter. We'll take that person and we'll keep them for the duration of the prescription. At the same time, we're trying to get them enrolled in housing programs and things of that nature, so that, we don't ever want to release anybody back to the street. So our numbers are similar. Now, the other thing to realize about all this is that this community is doing a lot better job in converting people out of shelter into housing than nearly anywhere in the United States. And that's because our systems are layered, integrated, and part of a continuum. So if you look at the national conversion rate from somebody going into shelter into housing, it's about 20%. So 8 out of the 10 people who go into any shelter in America tonight, when they leave it, they will not be going into housing. They'll be going back outside into homelessness.
Okay.
That's a very high number.
This is where the math ain't mathing.
Right.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we're doing about 50%, are your numbers also about 50%?
About 50%. The navigation center year one was 54%. So it's very typical.
Yeah.
So if both of you have about 50% of people leaving your program to go into housing.
Right.
And then the countrywide, it's about 80%, no, 20%.
20%.
Good.
That's right.
Going into housing. So if we have in our community about 50% of people getting out of your programs into housing,
Good.
and countrywide, we have about 20% of people getting out of the programs into housing.
That's
Still right.
Yeah.
And then we look at homelessness in other states, and then we look at homelessness in our state.
Good.
The math isn't really mathing for me. So I'm trying to figure out, how can we have 50% of people getting out of our programs into housing and have the problem be getting
much
easily worse?
Yeah.
How does this, it doesn't make any sense.
So the variable in that equation that we haven't discussed then is, what is the entry rate into homelessness compared to the exit rate out of homelessness?
Okay.
So the entry rate, because of the economy, and that's one of the things in Oregon we haven't done a great job of. So primarily on a day-to-day basis, I'm running a business, right?
Yeah.
I have to make payroll. I have to worry about, insurance. I have to manage a finance department and HR. I have to deal with BOLI and all the regulations and stuff of that nature. This is not the most business-friendly state by a long stretch. It is difficult to operate here in a whole host of reasons.
Well, and nonprofits are a business.
They are.
Whether or not they have a different goal and they have a different ownership style, right?
Good.
But it does operate as a business, which means you operate under the same, mostly the same rules.
Almost the same rules and the same laws as everybody else.
Yeah, it's just the profit goes back into it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So this has not been a place that's been very business friendly at times, or especially currently, I would say. So, one of the failings, I think, at the state level is that we need to make Oregon nationally competitive to attract outside businesses, to elevate the income in this state, to give people more opportunities. What happened in places like the Santiam Canyon at the end of the logging years, so to speak, those places were just left to rot down.
Oh, totally.
And it was just neglect. Let's just name it for what it was. We have to do a much better job at attracting and building businesses and bringing wealth into this state so that we don't have the poverty problem that we have. This is not just a demand side problem. It's a supply side problem as well. So,
okay. Explain that. Yeah.
So, I think a lot of folks believe that, the way to solve poverty issues is essentially to just surrender and act as if the poor will always be with us, right? That's a famous statement. That no matter what we do, that a certain percentage of the population will live in poverty and there's nothing we can do to ever get them out. So that's an argument from frustration. It's an argument from defeatism. I think a rising tide would lift all boats. If we could attract more wealth and resources and investment into the state, we would see better outcomes. We would see higher standards of living. We would have opportunity for folks that right now doesn't feel like that there's enough opportunity for. So one response to that frustration and that hopelessness and that exhaustion is just to say, you know what we need? We not only need a social safety net, which I think DJ and I would both agree that's necessary. We also need a guaranteed basic income, right? We need a guaranteed basic income out there to make sure that people cannot meet who cannot meet those expectations on what it takes to live in terms of rent and food and all those other things, that GBI, guaranteed basic income, is supplied by the government. I don't think that that's an acceptable answer. I think we need to find ways so that folks can enter the middle class again, when right now it feels really tough.
Yeah, well, one thing that is going to be a conversation that we're going to have down the road. I mean, the universal basic income idea is, especially with AI.
No, that's the problem, right?
Yeah. Because eventually, it's going to become an actual issue.
Yep.
It's not even like a classism issue. It's not even like a people are evil issue. It's just we have a technology that could currently replace. I read a study on this where it could currently replace. I believe it was 93% of service jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, if once we realize how to use it, it could technically replace that job.
Let me paint the picture of the challenge again, and then both of you could solve it in terms of we do in our area. We have an aging population. So if you run all the demographics, you'll see that folks are getting older.
Correct. Yeah.
And their income is sometimes static, but their expenses are all going up in every category, including your most important category, your housing. And so the studies all show that every time that housing cost tips over $100 more, your amount of poverty and houselessness goes up.
Yeah.
So there is a part of this graph that we cannot fight against in terms of you've made their income static, but you've raised their expenses. That's why the highest growing group of folks in our community becoming unsheltered is seniors.
Totally.
And so we as a society are failing them. We've frozen their income, but we're raising their expenses. That is where I believe government has to come in and say, no, we're not going to do that to folks who work their whole lives for our community.
So that is that's a particular problem in some ways, because it's what responsibility, getting back to your analogy at the very beginning of the conversation, of what burden do I have to keep pulling people out of the river, even though more people are entering the river. So when you look at the river, there is some ability to say, the very young and the very old, those are the folks that we should be lending most of our assistance to and getting folks out of that river. So the elderly population in particular is the fastest growing homeless segment in Oregon by far.
Do you know rough numbers?
I would have to double check those, not off the top of my head, but I do know that the last chance I looked at, it was the fastest growing. Youth increases have also been quite pronounced in the last few pit counts. The other statistic that DJ mentioned there, and I don't want to let this slip by, is that for every $100 in rent, for every $100 rental increase, the area's homeless population increases, and this is nationally proven, variety of contexts, by 9%. So every time the rent goes up $100, your homeless population increases by 9%. So you look at an area like ours, where you've had, $1,000 increases and $1,500 increases, and it's not surprising that we get consequential increases in homelessness. I also would briefly like to touch on. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go first.
Touch on how this all kind of fits in with policy in some ways. So, we talked a little bit earlier about what happened to the mental health system in the United States. So that process began in 1963 with the Community Mental Health Act, which essentially began the process of dramatically reducing the size of the population that was in these mental health institutions. So in 1955, for example, we had about 475 people per 100,000 in some kind of institution of care. By the end of the 1980s, it was down to about 15 per 100,000. So think about that. And the idea was they would be able to go get mental health treatment in their local community. But then the federal government in particular never really truly adequately funded the community mental health system. So a lot of the people that we see on street corners today would have been folks 40 and 50 years ago who were in some sort of mental health institution. So that is really...
About 15%, you said?
No, I said a lot of the people that we see today.
What percentage do you think of?
I think that's an important question. I want to see what DJ's answer is, because I got my own. You go ahead first.
Well, I can jump in and say what I'm hearing from national statistics from a behavioral health summit, just last week, 40% of folks nationwide who are experiencing homelessness are reporting some level of mental health challenge. And then I ran our own numbers on those 600 folks, 240 of them said they were experiencing a mental health challenge. It was like 40% of the folks that we're seeking to serve in an intervention also need mental and behavioral health assistance.
See, that's a great thing to know. And it's good to separate that. So maybe let's start with the folks who need the mental health assistance, because I think it's a different solution and problem than our elderly. Because
absolutely.
Go into depth on that. But those seem like they're very different issues.
They are.
And then I would like to touch on kids, because those seems like the three groups of people who, like, as a taxpayer and as a citizen,
are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes.
If we're talking about people that are on drugs, or people who could be working but love the lifestyle, or people who just shit hits the fan, things are happening.
Good.
We can argue about how to help those, but the ones that I think are much easier, that as a community we could say we got to take care of these folks, kids, the elderly, and the folks with mental health issues. So starting with the mental health issues, I remember there was a lot of conversation around the state closing down Fairview, which was our mental health institution, as well as other ones across the state. How many, I guess, what role do you think that has played in how homelessness is done? Or, like, is there a plan ever to do something like that again, or maybe in a different way? Or are we just like, we're going to have mentally ill people on the streets forever?
So there's no realistic plan in place at the moment.
Love that.
All right. So let's just be honest and direct. There is absolutely no serious and realistic plan in place at the moment. Okay. So of that 40% that DJ referenced, the next question I would follow up with for DJ is, what percentage of those do you really think needs some type of institutional setting and care? Because I don't think it's 40%.
Well, how much of that is like someone with ADHD or depression?
So,
right?
So
those are normal people.
Let's define our terms. So the term that we want to talk about is severe and persistent mental illness.
Okay.
So those folks who literally need staff paid for, supports, permanent supported housing in some setting, either completely institutional.
Were these self-reported? And the reason I ask is because when I go to the ER, right, I went in there, and I don't know if you've seen, I have scars across my legs because I almost lost my legs this last year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I went in there and I had like concrete eating through my skin, which was not ideal. And then, so I go in there, and there's like, sometimes when you go into the ER, there's like people who actually need it. And then there's people who are like, because they rate you, they're like, well, how much pain are you in? And
10.
10 should be I'm dying. Right. Like I'm physically dead. Mm-hmm. Whereas one's like, I'm cool. And 5's like, it hurts pretty bad, but like I'm physically okay.
But there's a triage approach, right?
Yeah. And so so they treat the people who say that they're a 10. So someone goes in there with a cold and they're like, I'm a 12, and they're freaking out, and we've all seen them.
Right.
And so how many of those people, like, that's why I ask if it's self-reported, because, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I need all the help I can get. And like, really like, toughen up, buttercup. But
so,
I'm curious as to see if is it self-reported, or are these like through?
Well, this is a both and. Okay. So it's not completely just self-reported, because we have partners and outpatient partners that we're literally connecting these folks.
Okay.
So those folks reporting that are getting services.
So they're currently getting services for those.
Yes. And I want to make sure it's clear. I'm not saying 40% of the folks have severe and persistent mental illness requiring institutionalization.
Right. Yeah.
They need a community behavioral health system, or they will not thrive on their own.
Okay. So that's fair. So let's separate those two, because the actual institution part, like, I believe there is a chunk of them who genuinely need that. And I had a guy talking to me about satellite space lasers on the sidewalk.
Not uncommon.
Yeah.
So I would say that percentage of the population is less than 10% of the overall homeless population.
Okay.
But it feels disproportionate because it is what we notice most frequently. Good. And they are the most highly visible, right? They're the ones sleeping in doorways of businesses in the downtown. They're the ones standing out, screaming at traffic and things of that nature. So they're drawing the public's attention to them in ways that the rest of the population is not.
So with that less than 10%, there's no plan to ever handle it, or are we just letting them?
Not on the scale that it was handled before. So Texas, for example, built about 600 additional state hospital beds in the last 5 years at a cost of nearly $3 billion. It's extraordinary. It's all available online.
Wait, what?
About $3 billion.
Why?
for all of the same things from looking at school board contracts, right? There's a construction cost. There's the all of the certification stuff that needs to go in for it to be licensed as a mental health bed. It's the security and the operations, and it's just extraordinary. So the idea that the state hospital system in Oregon is coming back is just fancy. It's not going to happen because the state does not have the financial resources, absent a significant federal commitment to rebuild that old state hospital system. So whatever answers we have for that 10% are going to have to come from other places.
Interesting. Okay. And then what about the other set that are needing mental health issues, but mental help, but like they don't need an actual.
Yeah, that's the good news.
Manageable.
Those 240 people that we're serving, we actually believe with the introduction of what I would call kind of support services, a therapeutic community where you're connecting them to on-site services, then out, patient behavioral health services, then putting them in a supported housing environment, then they're going to thrive. And that's where we do have a community plan.
Yes.
An under-resourced plan, but we're on the right track.
Right.
Jimmy can talk about the number of permanent supported housing beds, how many we had 10 years ago and how many we have now to address this exact need.
We had 22 10 years ago. We have 500 now.
We had 22.
We had 22 permanent supportive housing beds in 2017. Eugene at the same time had about 835.
Wow.
So this area has suffered from decades of underinvestment for a whole host of reasons. In Oregon funding politics, so part of my job is I am the vice president for legislative affairs at our statewide network, right? So I organize the community action legislative work across the state. There's this old joke at the Capitol that, it goes PGE, Portland gets everything. So they're always first in line, it feels like. And then for whatever reason, the second priority tends to be rural Oregon, which is, everything from the coast to the Idaho frontier. And then Eugene seems to slide in third, and Salem has always came in at the tail end of those conversations.
Yeah. In fact, I remember
deeply, deeply painful.
Yeah, I remember this conversation because I joined the executive committee for the Mid-Willamette Valley Homeless Alliance back in 2017, 2018, I think 2017.
Okay.
And I remembered when I heard about this, and they were talking about the amount of dollars that each city received. And Portland received X amount, which was astronomically high per homeless person.
Yeah.
Like they were like bougie homeless,
right?
And then there was Eugene, and then I believe Medford was included in there somewhere. Right. And then at the very bottom was Salem. And I was like, that's crazy. So that's why it made total sense for us to leave their coalition and do our own, because we're like, okay, we're not getting a fair shake here.
Salem was one of the worst funded homeless cities of any size in America in that era.
I believe it with how much
far.
I forgot the exact dollar amount, so I don't want to say it. But yeah, I believe that because I remember seeing it and being shocked by how did we not address
And I don't remember those numbers either because I put them together back then. I was part of the people that made those presentations that went around and talked about the imbalance and inequities between Portland, Eugene, and Salem. And it was shocking. We've made a lot of improvements today. I think, so I think one of the things we're concerned about is long-term investments into this work, right? It's not free, right? We need staff to be able to run it. Prevention has really suffered. So we talked about that 1.4 billion, but we've gone too far in the other direction right now. So the governor's recommended budget for the 25-27 biennium for prevention was $172 million, $172 million. Well, where did that number come from? That was the amount of money they spent in the previous biennium, state money, they spent in the previous biennium on prevention. The legislature is exhausted with prevention for a whole host of different reasons. Some people feel like it's just pouring money into a bottomless bucket. You get that argument. I heard people say that it's basically a landlord subsidy program. They don't like the fact that the money isn't going to the clients. It's going to the, in some cases, out of state interest, right? I've heard people say that there's just no off-ramp for this, right? It's becoming a kind of GBI. Now, AI is going to change it. I mean, because I read an article yesterday. I mean, it's going to wipe out a lot of sort of clerical jobs, I think, in the next 10 years.
What do you mean?
There's just so much conversation in the AI development community at the moment that work as we know it is going to be dramatically changed in the future, in the sense that a lot of the clerical work, a lot of the service work and those sorts of things are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, and there won't be any need to employ people to do those jobs. So the cost of that's going to come way down. On the one end, that's a capitalist principle that's deeply well understood. But at the same time, what are those people going to do to earn a living? So the same issue kind of is a reflection of this whole issue around prevention, in the sense that, when that $172 million budget ask was made, the outcome was $44 million. So $172 million down to $44 million. So it's a 72% cut-ish on prevention assistance at the time when the eviction rates are increasing. So last month, pre-pandemic, 2019, there were about 1,500 households in Oregon evicted each month. So it's around 18,000 households a year. Last month, the total was nearly 3,000, nearly twice as many as what we expected in the years before the pandemic. So we're going to have another homeless crisis coming because we're losing so many, low-income individuals, families back into homelessness.
Okay. Well, I think this also touches in what we were talking about with the elderly, right? So how do we solve that issue? So it sounds like one of the big causes, that the theme that I've sensed kind of throughout the conversation is housing affordability.
Big, huge.
Yeah. So, to be fair, I've noticed the same thing. Because I remember, being able to rent an apartment back in the day, you could get a pretty nice, apartment for like $800.
Right.
Now that same apartment is like double the price.
Yeah, nearly $2,000.
And it doesn't seem like it's that much nicer. In fact, usually it's the same exact everything. Right. So what's going on with that? And like, why isn't our state doing anything about it? Because it's like, to be completely honest, right? I'm going to be bluntly honest here. It's been the same people running this state for the last 40 years before I was born. Right. And so that's why, when I first got into politics, I was like, well, these guys suck because you've been running everything and you've no one to blame but yourselves because no one else has been running it. Mm-hmm. And so, but now, of course, I'm a little bit nicer than that, but to be honest, it is the same people running everything that have been running it for 40 years. And so how has this not been addressed? You know what I mean? Because usually it's the fight and the people blame each other and then nothing gets done. But there hasn't really been a fight in Oregon. It's just been nothing getting done. So
the two sides of the conversation essentially argue that both sides are talking about revenue, right? Yeah. Revenue. So if you look at Washington State, they have a lot more revenue than Oregon does. It's not just population, it's their philosophy around taxation. So the state feels like it has a very heavy tax burden, especially if you're somebody who makes quite a bit of money. So this state, for incomes over $200,000, for example, it has the lowest bring home pay in America for incomes over $200,000. So what is that? Because our taxes are terribly high? Not necessarily, but taxes are not politically viable in this current environment. But what Oregon will do is fee everybody to death, right? Yes. There's a fee for this, a fee for that, a fee for this, and pretty soon it's another form of taxation, right?
It's essentially taxes. Yeah. And they can do it without making us vote on it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And then the difference becomes, so just to name it, the Republicans look at the Democrats who have been in leadership for a long time, and they say, we ought to be in a better place than where we are. You guys have been in power for 40 years. Mm-hmm. Why don't we have better outcomes than what we do? The Democrats will and say, the Republicans look at the Democrats and say, are you using these resources in the most effective way that you possibly can? The Democrats will turn around and say, we just don't have enough money, right, to solve all the problems that you want government to solve. We're spending it here, we're spending it there. We have to make sure to take care of education. We have state prisons, we have this, we have that. It's just not, because costs continue to elevate on a national basis and our revenue structure is just dated. And there are certain things that are sacrosanct in the state that you can't address, like a statewide sales tax, for example. That is wildly off the table, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Just wildly off the table. So the state has a revenue problem, and I think, as some Republican leaders would say, it has a priority problem in terms of what issue to solve first. The homeless issue is no different. I operate the Arches Day Center over there on Commercial Street, which is controversial in a lot of circles. Mm-hmm. It is in some ways, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but in the most blunt and honest way I can say it, we are a surrogate for the state hospital in some regards.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so it was designed. Let me just be very clear about this. It was designed.
We're talking about the one off the place off of Center Street,
615
downtown.
Commercial Street downtown.
Right. Yeah, the one that's downtown that is by the skate park.
That's right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Right next to the park there.
Yeah.
So that was designed to be the lowest barrier walk-up facility in Salem. We bought it in 2017. And the reason it was designed as such is back then we had a huge number of people camping on the streets, living on the streets in the downtown. We really don't have the same numbers today as we did then, to be honest, especially not in 2019. I don't know if you remember how many people were camping on the street outside of Rite Aid and across from Nordstrom.
Yes.
It was awful.
It was pretty bad.
Pretty bad. So it was designed as a walk-up facility for those people who were mingling throughout the downtown so they could get in out of the weather, so that they could get a meal, so we could get them connected to services and, showers and laundry and all of those sorts of things. It was a harm reduction philosophy, right? You guys are doing harm to yourself today. We want you to do less harm to yourself tomorrow and even less down the road. It is very controversial, though, because it's seen as a gathering point for that group of people, right? Now, at the same time, the people who have the highest barriers, the people who have the greatest vulnerabilities and greatest challenges, in some cases who would have been in a state hospital 30 years ago, are using that facility. So we are acting as a surrogate for the state's interest in that way of trying to care for a population that the state won't care for.
I see. Okay, yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that location, the Center Street one, because there was all sorts of ruckus about it,
right?
And honestly, I have questions about it.
Sure,
but that one is what I'm hearing you say is serving a lot of the people who can't meet the barriers of the other places.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah,
and so a lot of the people who, for example, that less than 10% that we were talking about that would be institutionalized,
some of them anyway,
yelling at walls and spiders and bears and stuff. Like a lot of those people are going to this facility for help.
Yeah. And I think, in the last year, we saw a lot of voices in the community who really would have liked us to move out of that location. There was a conversation around that for a while. We had a back and forth with the city on it as well. But, I think one of the assumptions that went into that conversation was that if we moved, right, we took our services to Lancaster or some other place in Salem, that homeless population in the downtown would follow us somehow, right? They would move with us or they would disappear. None of that's true. They were there before we got there, and they'll be there after we're gone. A lot of the people who are there are folks who need different levels of state interventions that is just not available in the current design models that we have. Getting back to that failure that you were addressing earlier. And on the other hand, there are a lot of people there who have lower barriers that, we've housed. We've housed hundreds of people out of that facility just this month. So the veteran homeless population is a little bit different, a little bit lower barrier historically. So we've got a couple of folks over at the Arches Lodge. That's the one on Fisher that bought houses who really, they are, they get in the bed, get a roof over their head and a blanket to sleep under, take a shower, watch some TV. And all of the mental health conditions begin to recede a little bit. They get more stable. They get more directed toward getting out of homelessness. And so we have a really good conversion rate in those things. It's not 100%, right? Yeah. Because we're dealing with people with extraordinary needs.
Well, to get back to the conversation about the housing, just because I want to get us back on because we could sit here and talk about each of
forever.
These all day. Yeah. But I want to talk a little bit more about the housing thing. And how do we prevent people from losing their housing to begin with? And for example, because your ability to subsidize someone's housing, right, and spend money on that isn't sustainable in the long run, right? I mean, it's possible for us to be able to catch people when they fall and help them back up.
But eventually,
like housing just needs to be affordable.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we shouldn't like, it's good to have a safety net.
Yeah.
But I'm a strong believer that like eventually you should work yourself out of a job. You know what I
mean? We use that phrase all the time, that we should be laboring to work ourselves out of a job. And so having a safety net is really designed so that future generations will be able to access a safety net when they need it. It is not meant, and our organization's DNA is self-sufficiency at its core. We're not there to provide, a lifetime of assistance. We're there to get people stable so that they can eventually take care of themselves. That is the goal for almost all homeless services operations, with the exception of permanent supportive housing we talked about earlier, 22 beds versus 800 and plus in Eugene. Those models are a recognition that this particular person has categorically they have a disability that for whatever reason they're not ever going to be able to work again. And so they're not going to be fully self-sufficient. So there needs to be another model to support those folks. Now, even some of the more marginal ones that don't quite fit into that category, we will work to connect them to mainstream benefits like a housing authority voucher, a Section 8 voucher that is quasi-permanent, right? But our goal and hope is that folks are able to stabilize, they are able to re-enter the workforce, they're able to make meaningful contributions to society and become, as you said earlier, a part of a healthy and better Salem. And, it's never going to be the case that everybody's going to fit in that bucket.
Yeah.
But we need to do as best we can with as many as possible.
So what do we need to do as a city? Like, what can Salemites and Kaiserites do? Because I believe Salem and Kaiser,
it's the same place.
Yeah. So what can Salem and Kaiser do? What can our community do to address this at the state level? Or is there something that the county needs to be doing, the city, the state, or the county? Like, who do you guys think should be doing what? And then also, like, because how can we make the rent problem, right? The problem that rent and more like housing's too high. How do we solve it?
I'm a believer in supply. And so, push for a politics of abundance and building. And so you need to build more middle income housing so that people will move out of the lower income housing and it'll become available and affordable. Say yes to more multifamily. Yeah. Yes, every time to multifamily. And then in a zoning planning way, say yes to more mobile home parks, more park models,
mobile home parks in particular.
Open up the bottom of the market to a population that needs it.
Yeah.
Just because someone is in poverty, you're always going to have a lower percentage of folks who are doing, entry level work, but they should be housed.
Yeah.
And so you have to say yes to every form of housing and, oppose restrictive zoning and, push politicians at every level that we want to see more building.
I think that's correct. I would add.
Well, I would just, I'm sure you guys are know a bunch of builders as well, right? I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are builders, developers,
right?
Land use folks. And
it's too expensive to build in the state.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just all there is to it.
The politics.
Yeah. And we can name some of that too. So I get in trouble with the environmental crowd frequently because I
love the environment.
I don't hate them, but it ought to be easier to build in Oregon. Right.
Absolutely.
And, there's this, and I get the origin of the Oregon public land use laws. We don't want Oregon becoming California. We don't want it. We don't want sprawl from Portland down to Medford, right? We don't want that. But at the same time, we don't want our grandchildren moving to Idaho because that's the only place they can afford to live, right? Yeah. We have to build enough housing, relevant housing. Salem, getting back to that analogy earlier where Portland gets everything first, then rural Oregon, then Eugene, and then Salem. Salem was way behind on affordable housing construction as well. Now, we are catching up fast.
Yeah,
I will say that our agency historically hasn't been involved in housing development. We are taking our first steps in there now. We're about to buy, I can't name it yet till we sign it, but we're about to buy a 10-unit apartment complex here in Salem. We're about to close on another property that we're going to build 105 units on. I haven't told the school board this, but I want to give half of the referrals coming into that 105 units to the McKinney-Vento homeless in that system so that those folks will have a direct connection into affordable housing. I think there are just a lot of smart ways that we can leverage multiple funding streams, multiple opportunities to do better.
Yeah. So, that brings up a whole different conversation, but I don't want to go into it. I like the vein that we're on real quick. And so with the making building easier, it seems to me like what I hear often is like permit fees, other fees, this fees, that fees, or like regulation. Right. What are the specific things? Because you mentioned regulation. Are there anything specific that you know of or can think of that you think, well, these are the things that we should change that would make it a little bit easier to build? Or do we just leave those to builders, I guess?
Well, there are mechanisms that are being tried. So the legislation being passed by the state, just speaking directly on we want to build more shelters. Like, people don't want to see folks on sidewalks or in parks. And the first step is often a shelter, especially one that can provide a lot of safety and stability. But there were a lot of ways that any neighborhood, any, city planner could say no to those things before the state, introduced a bill that tried to create a pathway. But even though those pathways were created, cities were used to saying like, well, we don't want this.
Sorry, for which? For what?
Well, the specific reality is, we were given a mandate to, create more shelter beds in Polk County.
Oh,
and
correct.
Polk County leadership is like, yes, we want to do this.
Yeah.
We had to go through, 3 attempts to, be able to build anything. And it was smaller,
I see what
half the size, half the capacity of what it could have been.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is like, okay, so, and I do remember a lot of these conversations because, right, people were saying, hey, well, we need more housing available, for folks who are homeless.
Right.
Yep.
And then we build the housing and then they get upset that we built the housing because then now we're facing the reality of, I think it's because we see the reality of what is actually
next
happening.
door.
Yeah. We see it next door. We just don't want it near us.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is it's the not in my backyard
Yes.
scenario.
I didn't meet a person that didn't say, we want this, we need this. You're just choosing the wrong space.
Wrong space for it.
Yeah. Well, and I guess when I hear you saying, well, we're buying a 10-unit apartment complex or this or that, I'm like, ugh.
Right.
because that's how my gut, that's what happened in my gut. And I was like, ugh, because it's like, well, it's great that people are going to be housed. It's not great that the problem's getting worse.
Right.
I think that's what part of the biggest inner frustration is, you can help the people out of the river, but what are we doing up here?
Right. There's so many more people entering the river now than there were 30 years ago. And that's the problem. So look at affordable housing construction in Oregon. We work in this in a variety of ways all the time. Watch the awards given out by Oregon Housing and Community Services on their website this summer. The average price per door of affordable housing construction in Oregon is around $435,000. You can buy a house for that in Salem. $435,000 per door. And so why is that cost so high? Well, it's because in a lot of cases, since this isn't federal money, it's state money, but they still use prevailing wage, and that jacks up the labor costs very high. We want people to be paid well, but at the same time, there has to be some balance in those sorts of things. The fees.
Are you talking about for building homeless shelters?
No, building just general apartment complexes. $435,000 a door. That's what it costs to build an apartment complex in Oregon right now.
Jeez.
It's much worse in California. It's nearly
prevailing wage to build apartment
absolutely
complexes?
If you're using state dollars. If you're using state dollars
I
and
see.
connected to affordable housing, you have to pay prevailing wage.
Well, here would be you touched on this earlier, DJ, and I actually, when you said that, I was like, because here's something that I frequently would tell people is because I've been on since I was 20 years old, I stupidly decided that I'd get involved in stuff. Not stupidly. I'm actually glad I did, but it's frustrating sometimes. And I realized that everyone and their mom is on a committee and you have to be on 30 different committees.
Mm-hmm.
And all these committees they have a committee to talk about what this committee should be doing and then make a decision about that committee. And it's just too many committees. Right. And I remember sitting there thinking as I'm on, I forgot what committee it was. There was a committee around homelessness. And I'm like, man, the brain power, I was looking around at the people in the room and I was like,
adding up the salaries sometimes.
In
the conversation. Yeah.
Well, and I was looking at them. I'm not just that, but their usefulness in the world. I'm like, you build things. You run this giant organization. If we use the same brain power to just build apartment complexes, regular housing, not affordable housing, because then we don't have to deal with all that crap.
Right.
Just regular freaking housing, regular apartment complexes, regular houses. Then, like you were saying, the affordable housing can open up because those people can move up and regular housing is affordable and you don't need prevailing wage for regular housing.
And that's part of the problem right now is we have compression, right? There's no place for that market relief to take place right now. The demand is still too high because our vacancy rates are still too low. That's a real problem.
Dang. What do we do?
But I have a rule internally. We don't ever want to be having conversations about the conversation, right? That is a massive waste of time and resources to spend our time having conversations about conversations. We need to be marshaling our efforts toward doing things and maybe talking about it a little bit less.
Okay. So to wrap that little thing with a bow, our biggest thing that we're talking about with housing affordability is building more. The supply side.
Quantity. Yep.
It's good.
Quantity.
Good.
And that'll help. That'll help drive down prices long term. Now, I would also say there's some policy things. So the state has had, since the pandemic began, an experiment in rent control. And I think it has been a massive failure because it only allows landlords to raise the rate once a year. And they're almost compelled to raise it to the state maximum because if they can't anticipate future expenses, right?
Yes.
So this year on January 1, in the formula, the state allowed everybody to raise the rents 9.5%. Well, if you're already paying $1,500, another 10% on top of that's another is $1,650. And then every year progressively this gets worse.
Yeah.
So the advocates of the rent control system basically say that, well, that's true, but it still kept our rents lower than areas around us. Certainly California, but they're so big it's almost not worth the comparison. But it's lower than they are in Washington. It's lower than they are in some other comparable states, but it's not that much lower. This is still one of the most expensive places to live. Definitely.
Yeah.
Our incomes are lower.
Significantly lower.
Yeah. So the stress then, stress then on those families is much greater as a result of those two competing phenomenons.
Yeah. Well, let's just play it back real quick. Let's just say live in a world where if we increase, this is a conversation that I've had with many people. And when I say, hey, we just need to increase regular housing, do you believe that, it is a good question. Do you believe that like housing would just stay the same? There's just more of it and then it just rises less? Or do you think actual rents might go down?
So
go ahead.
I will say the answer to that question is in the long-term population progressions. So we are reaching a population peak, which will then decline. I worry that, and I don't like saying this out loud because I think people will take it and run with it, but I worry that 15 years from now, we'll be seeing articles in the newspaper about what are we going to do with all these empty apartment units that we have in town. And a lot of the ways that, there was an article in the Oregonian this morning about the collapse of the commercial rental market in Portland because billions lost essentially in value. Yeah. So I worry that, we are building so much and so quickly, and we have to. There's no other option. At the beginning of this population arc, that once that population begins to decline, which is where it's headed, then we might get in a position that there is surplus available. There are empty units available. And theoretically, if that were to happen, under market dynamics, that would force the prices down. So I think it is possible, not immediate, but possible over a longer arc of time that we could see lower rents. It doesn't feel very plausible right now.
It doesn't feel very plausible right now, to be honest. I was just curious to hear you guys' insight. What do you think, DJ?
This is an area, I love to stay in my lane. If you want to have me share the best intervention that is going to change the most people's lives, I could tell you all day. Yeah. And then I sit at the place of learning. Like I'll give a shout out to Eco Northwest. They're doing incredible research and work, and people should look into what they're saying as they're forming their opinions about housing policy.
I see what you mean. So because you're able to identify the issue, but then you leave that to the experts of the building. Fair enough. Well, one thing I do worry about, I'll just touch on this just for a second, and then we'll move on. Is it was really interesting to read the article about these giant buildings in Portland losing so much value. And it's really interesting to me having people be like, oh, I wonder why this is happening. And you see the way they've been running the city for the past few years. And I'm like, And so one thing that a lot of people in Salem, this is a genuine feeling that a lot of people have felt, is like, are we making Salem more like Portland? Or are we making Salem more like, I don't know, another state like Boise, or like a state, like one that's a little bit better ran and healthier. And so that's one worry that, a lot of people I think are feeling.
Is reasonable. So I will just say this, Portland's homeless policy in particular has been poorly run for the last 20 plus years. So they have an organization up there called the Joint Office of Homeless Services. And basically that office created, I know the people who created it. It was created as a way to keep the county and the city from fighting each other every time a new mayor came in and wanted to change course on policy. So the office was created to create peace and stability and that sort of thing. But they don't have a delivery mechanism there that is integrated enough in terms of this agency is working closely with this one, that one's working. They're all sort of doing their own thing. They don't have that kind of policy integration that's allowed them to be successful on scale. And then they drift back and forth. I don't know if you followed this 3 years ago, former mayor was, we need to round everybody up and put them in these big government camps. That was a progressive bluest of blue city on the West Coast who said we need to put all the homeless population in these big 200, 2 to 3 years ago.
That's crazy.
No, I mean, there was this plan to create, was it 3 or 5? Believe it, let's just start with 3.
Yeah.
3 sort of government designated areas to put up to 250 people in fairly close confines where they would be quasi forced to work with social workers and that sort of thing. So imagine taking a mini Wallace, a city unto itself, concentrating it in that way, mixing people together who don't maybe not like each other or know each other or trust each other, not all that sort of thing. Having city services show up sometimes, but not 24/7 and not this and not that, it would have been chaos and it would have created harm and it would have made the problem worse. So the policy up there has drifted back and forth for years. So as the homeless population here has grown, and it definitely has grown, I think people, when they drive to the airport, in Portland and drive through Gresham and on the east side of 205, they see a lot of people living along the interstate and they think, wow, man, that feels pretty similar to some of the things I'm seeing in Salem. And I don't want my city to become like Portland. And I don't think all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean the collective housing and homeless community, have done the best job at times of explaining ourselves and sort of creating public trust, and also making sure that our services are needed in the places that they're needed the most. And let me just give you an example. So if you are standing out there on the corner of Commercial and, I don't know, Center, they do intersect, don't they? Before I get too far on that. Here in 2026 versus 2019, you see something very different, right? Yes. We've made a lot of progress in the downtown. As frustrated as people sometimes get with what we have currently, it is nothing like what it was in 2019 when we had 200 to 300 people camping in that location under the overhangs. We had a baby born on the sidewalk. It was horrific.
It's a crazy time to be alive.
Now, get in your car today and drive over to Lancaster in East Salem. And the homeless population over there has grown dramatically. Most of our services, when I say ours, I mean the collective community, but concentrated in the center part of town because that's where the homeless population was. We've done less a great job in the east side of town, and I think we're going to have to do a better job over there in the future because I think that part of town is feeling the crunch the most.
Well, also like in the downtown area, like you don't feel it like as bad as it was in 2019 or 2020, like in the by the mall as much, which is still there, but it's not there as bad, right? The downtown, while you're walking around, feels safer than it did. But I mean, when you go underneath, I was writing a story about the ODOT properties. And about how the city, the city was asking them, hey guys, like, come on. But it's bad. Like underneath the bridges, like it's a whole, like a little town under there.
It is.
And then Wallace Marine Park, I made a joke before we started. I was like, that's Salem's unincorporated city of Wallace Marine Park. We got more Wallace Marine Park and Four Corners. And
so something you will notice is that in the winter, the homeless population crowd closer to the downtown. And they're more easily visible because, the green is not there, right? All of the vines and the trees and the leaves and all that sort of stuff that obscure a lot of what's going on. I saw a very interesting set of footage on Facebook the other day. I don't know if you saw it, which was drone footage that scanned over the top of Wallace. Did you see that?
I saw that.
Yeah. It was shocking, right? And I think to a lot of people. But I would also say that it's not the case that nobody's being housed out of Wallace. It's just the case that many of the tougher cases to address are in Wallace. And it's been a problem over time. I've had a lot of clients, pass away, natural causes that have lived in that location. So back in 2017, natural causes. Yeah. They're just sick. No, they're just sick. Oh. So the average age of death of a homeless person in this community is 52 years of age. Right. They're dying of the same things you and I are dying from. I mean, I'm 30 years older than you probably, but I'm dying faster than you are. But they're dying of all the same things the rest of us are dying. They're just dying 10 to 15 years faster. So, I mean, once you hit 50 years old and you're outside, it's almost a death sentence within a fairly reasonable period of time. So, I mean, if you look at the growth there, it can be very frustrating, I think. But we also have to kind of analyze it in context of everything else that's going on around. So back in 2017 to about 2021, the city ran a program called the Homeless Rental Assistance Program. I don't know if you remember that. HRAP, you may have heard that term back then.
Yes.
Through the Housing Authority. I designed the entry pieces of that. They ran the units and the case management. We handled the entry pieces. And one of the questions, Jesse, back then I was concerned about was, I heard this story back then that says, you're going to make things so nice here, and homeless people from all across the country are going to come to Salem to get help, and all across Oregon to come to, there's a self-defeating element to this because if you figure this out, everybody's going to want a piece of it, right? So we created this unique interview process for that program. And one of the questions we asked there, which we never really ask anywhere else, is where were you born?
Good.
And how long have you lived Now, in Marion and Polk, right? Not necessarily Salem, but how long you lived in Marion and Polk.
Yeah.
And 85% of them were residents of one of the two counties for more than 10 years. That's a lot. Now, they may have been from Silverton. They may have been from Dallas. And a lot of times, small cities in particular will say, they've walked people up historically to the edge of town and say, there's a really nice set of resources available for you in Salem. We'll get you a ride over there. And there has been some of that. And there's some coming from the East Coast and the South and the Midwest and that sort of stuff.
How much of it do you think is that? Like as a whole?
15% at the most.
When is the last time that we did this?
So that's a really good question, right? So the basis of that question is, do you believe that here in 2026, that there's been a material change over the phenomenon you observed from 17 to 21, right? And
because was that in 2017 that we got this 85% number?
It was between 2017 and 2021. So
okay.
4 years worth.
Okay.
So the last 5 years, I don't have that information. Okay. Nobody has that information. Okay. We have anecdotal information.
Could we get it? Because that gets used a lot. But I can tell you this. When I was in college, because I used to be homeless when I was a kid, right? I was for a significant amount of time and it was not fun at all.
No, it wasn't.
And one thing that I noticed and that I've done since then, there's like a, when I was starting to make a name for myself here, I was trying to make the community better. There was a part of my life when, and I'll tell you this story so you understand why I was doing this. There was a time when I had a meeting with Tom Hoffert. It was right when he became the CEO of the chamber, and I was on the school board at the time, and I was. At the time I was thinking all highly of myself, like I'm just bougie. And I was walking downtown. I was going down to Isaac's, and I passed by this homeless kid that was sitting in front of India Palace at the time, and he was sitting there. And I walked by this kid, and I just realized that what I did. I walked by and I completely ignored him. I didn't even look his direction. Didn't care.
Recognize him.
I was so high and mighty and on my way to do important things. And I just remember I realized what I had just done because I got a flashback of when I was that kid. And people would walk, these fancy dudes in suits would walk by me. And I just realized what I did. And I just I broke down in tears. I missed that meeting actually. And I felt so bad. I don't know if I ever told Tom that's why I missed that meeting, but I was a hot mess for a minute and I realized what I did. So then I went home and I, sold off all my crap, broke up with the girl I was with and, so changed my life. But my point
so that was God telling you it was time to make some changes.
Exactly. But, So that's a complete side quest. But my point of saying that story was from then on, just to make sure, I wanted to make sure that I never lose that of forgetting where I've come from. And so what I started doing was during lunch, I went to Willamette University. A lot of times I would go get a Subway sandwich or something, and then I'd go down and I'd sit next to a homeless person. And I just talked to them about life. I never told anybody I did this. I just did it because for me. But what I noticed was I would ask people where they're from. And I don't know. I've met a lot of people who at least told me that they're from other states. And now was I just around that less than 10% that need to be institutionalized? Or is it because there is a higher percentage of people from other states? Or could that number from 2017 have changed?
Yeah. So
I want to jump into kind of grab onto your story there because I do want your listeners to, hear we have some math problems on the prevention side that more people are becoming unsheltered than our current services, can support. Yeah. So that's a tension we're all feeling. But then what you just shared, I love that you started with the school district environment because that system is imperfect as it is. It is still a yes from the community that if you are of this age, we are going to provide one-on-one support for the 14% of students who have some kind of learning challenge and we are going to see and support their needs. We say yes to that for our most vulnerable young and the system is imperfect, but it is doing a lot better than once a person is 18 because the interventions in this community are doing the best they can to serve that vulnerable set of elderly, mentally sick and young folks Like we are saying yes to those folks. And our capacity is about 1,200 folks a night. That is our capacity right now for the whole community. So more folks than that are coming into the system, and our system is saying, yes, you're seen and cared for. Yes, you're supported. We're not just holding you. We're going to help you get stabilized and better. And we are doing the best work we can. And we have pretty good outcomes, better than most other areas. And yet, because the inflow is so high, we're being judged as ineffective, when I don't think that's what the outcomes and the percentages would tell you if you put our intervention up against other areas.
Yeah. So do you think that a lot of the people coming in, the giant influx, do you think a lot of that is from people coming from out of state or from a different area? Or do you think it's that same 85% coming through that's from 2017? And or how much of it do you think is people who leave your programs and then end up coming back?
So I'm going to speculate on a few of those things. I think the most logical conclusion is that it may not be 8% or maybe 75%, but the balance of the majority of the population is still local in some way, shape, or form. I don't want to lose the opportunity to circle back to your story, because if the listeners at home, the public, take any one message away from this entire conversation, what I want them to leave with is the empathy and the love and the sentiment that you expressed as a part of that story, right? Okay. When you walk by that person and then you had this self-reflective moment of your own sort of judgment and action. So my father died homeless. He was a career alcoholic. He died homeless when he was
dying industry.
It's a dying industry. 63 years of age. I was homeless for a little while. Yeah. And I think that judgment that we all have in our daily lives, forget the homeless for a second, just generally toward people who need our help in one way, shape, or form, is something we need to labor to having a healthy community, Dr. King's, beloved community, is the idea that we are all sort of in some ways responsible for one another. And beyond the homeless issue itself, when we see somebody who is suffering or in pain or in need of love, we should do everything in our power, not sacrifice, in the sense of we need to give up what we need so that somebody else can have what we have. Yeah. Maybe a little bit, but not all of it. But we need to sort of look at them and say, what can I do? What can I do to alleviate your pain and get you to a better and healthier place? So that's the heart of the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to solve, and I know this is going to be very controversial because there's so much frustration with how much money is going into the system. And yet, as you pointed out, a ton of money going into the system. And yet at the same time, as you're pointing out, it's getting worse. Those two things may not be, they're correlated, but they may not be causal. They may not be connected. And I know people are very frustrated with how much money is going in and what seems to be, limited results. But we're really trying to solve a $10 problem with a quarter in a lot of ways, right? I really have the capacity to help about 1 out of every 15 people that we interact with, help financially, about 1 out of every 15 people that we interact with. So we're always making decisions, right, about who gets help first, what the priorities are. And we're trying to dice that up in so many ways. It feels like, I don't know what your experience is, but it feels like that's, that the fact that when we have so many priorities, we don't really have any, that it feels like it's working against itself sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that kind of call, because I think that's my belief in the best intent of each person in the community who's engaging this challenge is they don't want to see people suffering like that. As a first impulse, and they want to know, how are we going to make this better, and who's responsible for caring for that person, who is supposed to take action. If it's not me directly, like who is supposed to be taking action. And what I want to say over and over again is, we cannot punish the people at the bottom to solve this challenge. The answer to the challenge is not a punishment of those who are suffering, but in this enlightenment of, okay, how can we do better as a community where we are seeing less people suffering?
And that doesn't mean there's no accountability, right? We would never argue that no one needed some accountability to be responsible for, trying to help themselves at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look back at the history of America broadly, let's just forget about Salem and Warren. There have been all kinds of instances in our history where we've looked at the poor population and sort of blamed them for the conditions of their own poverty, right? There's some moral failing in them. There's something that they lack in terms of work ethic or, whatever. We've got to evolve beyond that and sort of, get to a place where, I don't like the way you're living. I don't like the choices you're making. Yes, I wouldn't do what you're doing, but we need to help you get to a healthier world. So in this,
I don't know. I feel like I would want to push back on that just a
sure.
little bit.
Yeah.
And the reason is because this is a topic I purposely avoided for the beginning of the conversation because I wanted to really focus on longer term things.
Right.
There's a lot of drugs being
There's a lot of
used.
drugs.
And I think that I don't know, even when I was homeless, I chose not to do drugs and I just I didn't want to be there.
Right.
It was not a good time. And I remember I would sleep. There was an elevator I slept in Portland for a good chunk of time. And do you know where the Buffalo Wild Wings used to be? Downtown?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So that parking garage, the one that's catty corner.
Parkade. Yeah.
I used to sleep in the elevator for quite a while. And just because, I remember I would sleep there and my thinking, I wasn't philosophizing at the time. I'm just trying to exist to the next day was because I didn't want to get stabbed. I didn't want to get drugged and I felt safer in this elevator. And my point of that is how much of this do you think is attributable to people using drugs? Because I don't know, I am of the belief that, and I could be 100% wrong because I've never had a drug addiction problem.
Sure.
But I have been around a lot of people who have. Drugs are what tore me away from my family when I was a little kid. And so, I just think that I don't know, I'm not a big fan of us giving them heroin needles. I'm not really a big fan of that. I'm not really a big fan of us allowing drugs to be brought into the place. But then at the same time, how do you address the fact that some of them are dependent on it and they can't get off of it until they have to be slowly taken off?
Yeah. So I don't know. You just named the problem in the sense that there are really sort of two ways that people look at this. On the one hand, people look at drugs as a behavioral problem, right? You have a choice that you're doing this, it's harming yourself, it's harming other people in the community, and you're creating a social harm and you know better and you should stop. The other way of looking at this is that it's essentially a medical problem, right? You have an addiction issue that you can't cure and you need medical treatment in whatever that amounts to. And that sort of leads you to very different conclusion about who's responsible for that behavior. And there were at least some mitigating factors around it. So in Wallace, I just want to make sure that everybody at home understands we're talking about a population of around 225 to 300 people at any time. It swells, goes up and goes down. It's been some conversation that it was higher than that, but it's about 300 people at max most of the year. And yes, there's a heavy amount of drug trafficking. There's drug use in that community. For us and for me, so there's two ways that homeless providers look at this broader system issue. And it has a lot to do with your background. One is you can sort of approach this from a mental health perspective, right? And there is no homeless population. There's only the homeless person in front of you, and you're trying to help that person. When you're designing a system, however, in my experience, that approach is not very useful. So I approach it more from a sociological standpoint in the sense that there is no homeless person, there's just a homeless population. We need to build a system that addresses the majority of the homeless population. And if that could somehow, not there yet, could somehow wipe out 80% of that homeless population and get them housed, then I'll worry about the other 20% on the background. So I don't spend a whole lot of time sort of trying to come up with solutions to the drug problem in Wallace or anywhere else, because it kind of gets in the way of us getting folks off the street. Now,
but then again, the drug problem gets them back on the street to begin with.
It can.
Right? Because
it can.
When you're addicted to something, they will spend when you already have slim margins of what your budget is, right? A lot of middle income and lower income families are feeling that hard
right now.
Right?
Yeah.
So then you add in a drug problem that you in your head think is more important than food or these other basic needs that can cause homelessness.
Totally.
See what I mean? So if we don't also address that, then it's just going to lead back to the same cycle.
Absolutely. I wouldn't put disproportionate emphasis on that, however, because there are other things. I think gambling in this state is a little bit out of control too, and that can certainly lead to the reduction of household income. You can go down a whole laundry list of vices that people have that are sort of undermining the viability of low-income households. But I don't want to be dismissive of the drug issue either. and I also want to be very clear. So we operate 7 shelters. There's a lot of confusion about what the rules are around those sorts of things, right? So in the context of shelters nationwide, there are dry shelters. I would say UGM is a dry shelter, right? We expect you not to be using while you're there, and we expect you to be sober while you're there. There are damp shelters, and then there are wet shelters. So we operate wet shelters that are a little bit closer to damp than not. But generally what I mean by that is we do not, under any circumstance, allow drugs on property. If we find drugs on your property, we force you to surrender them. And if you don't surrender them, or you continue to bring them back on the property, you are out. And that's part of the reason why that 50% number exists, because if you can't follow the rules, again, we're running a business, right? I have to protect our insurance, liability, and all these other things. I can't. So,
if you're actively bringing drugs on the property,
your risk.
You're not trying to help yourself out.
No.
You know what I mean? You're not there for the right intention.
And getting back to that homeless population, you're also posing a risk for the other 74 people in the shelter, right? Yeah. So, I mean, in that sense, I don't have a whole lot of patience for that sort of thing. So these are wet shelters in the sense that if you want to go off property and get stoned, if you want to go off property and get drunk, and you come back and you go into your bed and fall asleep and don't bother anybody, you don't bring drugs on property, that's allowable, right? There is a progression of behavior we want to see over time, working with case management. Like, you're doing this on the first night and the third night, but hopefully you're doing it a lot less by the first month and the third month. And hopefully you're not doing it all in 4 or 5 months, because this idea that people can just go cold turkey from these sorts of things is not really backed up by the science from some of these very powerful drugs that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I want to make sure and get our sound bites in for Church at the Park that, we're low barrier of entry, and then we have high expectations that people are going to engage, and that safety is going to lead to sobriety, and that we're putting these recovery and group opportunities in front of them all the time. And the fact that hurt people do hurt people, and people need to be held accountable for violence to protect other folks. And we have a zero tolerance for both drugs and alcohol on property. And violence on property. And we ask law enforcement for support in that. Yeah. And so there is a really false picture that is immediately demystified when people actually come on a tour of the kind of safety and sanitation and support that folks are receiving on our sites and in our shelters. And so the idea that we allow a low barrier to entry in terms of you don't need to pass a drug test to be sheltered does not mean you can find drugs or alcohol on our shelter property.
Yeah.
And
I would assume that with that comes, though, people sneaking them in.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Do
you like check people ever, or like check the rooms? Because you have people there
for youth populations. We do room checks, bag checks, all that sort of stuff. For adults, we do room checks fairly frequently. We're not strip searching people and things like that nature, but we are checking here and there for those things by policy. And if we catch people with it, then there are consequences that are associated with it.
Check the rooms.
If the lodge, for example, it's once a week. And we knock on doors every day to check on people. So it's a much more active intervention than I think than people understand.
Because most of us don't know that you do any, to be completely
honest.
That's why it's great to talk about this.
And you do those tours all the time, right?
I love talking about our program. There's a tour available every week. People can come and basically look on the door at like what a health check looks like, and the fact that staff are engaging with people every day, but then we have a weekly health check that we go through, how are they keeping their space and what is in their space. And then we do a monthly kind of deep reset of a person's, living shelter, where everything comes out, hard reset. And again, if anything inappropriate is found, it's a full write-up and like an action plan that this can't continue. And that is a reality, that we have negative exits because people are making it unsafe for others.
Well, that's good to know. I'm glad we cleared that up. Well, so how often are you doing the checks again? How often are you guys doing the checks?
So we do it is documented, a weekly health check of everyone's living space. What does a health check mean? So that's why you got to come on a tour. It's right on the door. Because a big trauma-informed thing is like, I'm not just coming and because, you and I haven't been getting along, Jesse, and like we're from a different background.
Yeah.
I'm giving you a bad health check. No, it's like literally we talked about it at intake. Then it's posted on your door what our expectations are around you having a healthy space and how you keep your possessions, how you don't have food in the space, and like how you're caring for your animal. Because again, part of low barrier to us in doing outreach for 10 years was people get to have their pets, and we have a whole check-in and process for getting pets,
I like the pets.
Dogs and
ready.
cats, and we've had rabbits.
People get to keep more possessions. Yeah. They have 4 totes of possessions, but they have to manage their stuff down to 4 totes. And we can see out in the community that that's a real developmental rent-ready activity to be able to manage your stuff. And so again, there are these 10 things that we're going to talk about, and I'm not judging you because I don't like you. It's like, and so now that you didn't pass the health check, I'm going to come back in 2 days, not a week, and we're going to check in on it.
We were probably 2 of the only businesses in town that have mandatory randomized drug testing for staff, right? So that is highly unusual in Oregon. But we want to make sure that, any staff that we don't know about with addiction issues aren't bringing drugs into the facility, right? So
they're selling them to the people.
Right. Yeah. And so that policy extends from me to every employee in the agency. And we've had that in place for 3 years. It has been very successful.
This is a great time to say, kudos to every partner that Church of the Park partners with, which is over 50. But, Community Action was one of the original groups that we came to the table and we said, hey, we want to help with this emergency sheltering, so help us understand policies. So as soon as we had staff, we had, entry-level drug testing and randoms. So because we're wanting to say yes to lived experience, but then again, prevention, doing things preventatively. Like we have very few in our 5 years of doing random drug testing, very few people pop up on that because they know it's there.
Interesting. You both operate well at shelters, which means that they're allowed to come in. If they were on it, they're not allowed to bring them in. Good. But if they are, you're not checking daily if they're currently on it. You don't drug test.
That's right.
Okay. So what do we do then about the drug issue? Because it's very clearly an issue.
Yeah, but let's start, as Jimmy begins to share, with naming the fact that it is probably our self-reported and kind of we verify, like it's about 15% of the folks we serve are struggling with that challenge.
With an addiction issue.
Yeah.
About 15%?
15%. Exactly.
There's a difference between addiction and usage.
Okay.
The addiction and usage. There's sort of recreational usage out there that, huge numbers of people in the state are doing on a base.
Yeah. Well,
we're talking about
people.
Yeah. And so that's the other thing about this conversation. It gets a little weird. So if you look at SAMHSA, for example, substance abuse at the federal level, and their analysis of the number of people with addiction issues in the United States, the last report they had, which I think was last year, said that 60 million Americans, 60 million have some kind of addiction issue, whether it's alcohol or drugs or prescriptions or without. So the fact
that's not even including usage.
No.
Yeah.
This is an addiction issue.
Interesting.
And so when you step back and say, okay, then if that's the case, well, where are the drugs? The drugs are everywhere. They're in the jail. They're in the school district. The teachers are using them. They are, in the library. If you go to a random city council meeting on any one Monday night, I guarantee you that there are probably 10 people with drugs on their possession in that building, right? The drugs are pervasive and they're everywhere all the time. So we try to sort of push back a little bit on folks singling out the homeless population as somehow some exception to this general rule in the United States. So the question really becomes for a shelter provider, if the drugs are there, the drugs are everywhere, it isn't so much that the drugs are there or everywhere. It's what you do when you find the drugs, right? So we're not going to, because people, like you said earlier, are going to sneak things in. They're going to hide and conceal. Sure. And so the test really isn't that they are, getting them by this or they exist to begin with. The test is really, are you creating consequences for situations when you do find them? What are you doing when you find them? And so clients have to have expectations that they cannot be bringing drugs on property because that's just, no business can operate that way anywhere.
And so what do you do when you find them?
So, clients get written up, basically. They get warnings. What
does write up mean?
Quite frankly, it can have pretty serious consequences, right? Because, if you lose a shelter bed, it could literally be a life and death decision, for some.
Yeah.
And so they're basically given warnings if you continue this behavior. It just depends on the shelter type and the population there. But typically, the policies are common across the shelter. But, probably 3 before, you're looking at exiting somebody, depending on circumstances, because there are fork in the eye scenarios, right? Where, the first time is too much, depending on what the circumstances are.
Yeah.
But, we try to walk with people, and I don't like using flowery language around these things, but we try to help people and understand that they're in the middle of an addiction issue. We're not trying to punish or penalize them, but they have to understand the consequences, just like you were saying earlier. They have to understand the consequences on the other people. Right? The other people in the shelter, it risks the housing and the sheltering of everybody there if we tolerate those sorts of things. So we take a harder line on that than I think people sometimes expect, because there's just not a whole lot of grace for us in trying to protect the people who are in our care.
Well, interesting. So I guess I was hoping to hear some sort of conclusion or solution to that, but it doesn't seem like there really is one.
Well, again, recovery interventions are good, and not all of them are the same. And kind of having a recovery-based conversation of like, well, where's the investment? Where's the participation? Yeah. Where are the graduation rates? Like, how are these programs helping people kind of thrive? Is a great question. I think the idea that everyone who is unsheltered needs drug and alcohol recovery is such a myth.
Yeah.
When we start the conversation with talking about all of these elderly folks entering the system, and when we look at the PIT count data and say 43% of the people doing this survey are new to homelessness.
First time in their life.
The recovery conversation is real. It's relevant. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be effective, but it is not the whole conversation.
Yeah. And so DJ is articulating the psychological approach to this question in a lot of ways by focusing on the individual in front of you. I'm a more sociological background person in systems, in the sense that, to me, this is not a new conversation. Go back to Nancy Reagan in the 1980s. She had this massive national campaign, don't do drugs, right? If you watch movies from that era, they parody that statement all the time. Addictive substances have been around as long as human history has began. So the idea that we are going to systematically eradicate them from the human experience, short of, things have changed. If you were to tell me 15 years ago that there would be a major weight loss drug that is successful as GLPs, I would have scoffed at that, right? Yet it's making a huge difference across. So there may be a medical solution down the line for this sort of stuff, but I think anybody that's looking for public policy answers to a medical complication in this day and age right now is going to be frustrated that there are people out. The funny thing is, Jesse, there are people out there who will tell you this problem is easy to solve. We can make big changes right now. All we have to do is have consequences and expectations for the homeless population. If they're going to use drugs, they need to go to jail, right? That's a typical one that you hear. But there's really no evidence that incarceration has any impact on long-term addiction issues. There's no evidence that it has any positive impact on reducing the homeless population. In fact, there's a lot of evidence in the other direction. So I just want to, what I want people at home to understand is that like you just said a moment ago, and like DJ just said, yes, we're going to have a lot of successes on one-on-one individualized basis. But if our goal is basically to end the homeless crisis by getting rid of drug addiction, that's a bridge that may be a little too far at the moment for immediate gains.
Well, I had another question. Sorry to go on like another side quest. Well, it sounds like we're not finding a real good solution to this one. So, do you have anything else you want to say about it?
Not particularly, do you?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
good.
Anyways, well, I wish there was a better answer, but it doesn't seem like there is. Another thing that like typically happens is, when I was in my undergrad, I was an economics major.
Okay.
And we would talk a lot about systems. Right. And it seems as if a lot of people will talk about our systems, specifically like when you're in college, right? A lot of people will talk about systemic racism. What seems like is very prevalent in America would be well, you can argue that all you want, but that's not, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But similar to that would be, it seems as if there's a lot of systems kind of stack the odds against people who are poor. From my perspective,
Historically, yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
And one good example of this that I can tell you from personal experience was, my birth family, right? So both of my birth parents were in prison for a good chunk of my life, and when they got out, they were going to college, and they tried to go to college. And then what you start to see, actually take that out. I don't want to talk about them.
Okay.
Let me think of a better example. Okay. So one thing that I want to, touch on that I'm curious to know from your guys' perspective, if this is a big enough factor in homelessness to worry about it or not. Here's what it is. Felons. So I feel like a lot of times people who have felonies or criminal records wear a scarlet letter on their chest for the rest of their lives. Now, I would like to be specifically say, and you don't have to make any comment on this, I'll just say it, right? There was a instance recently about a guy who was a felon being put on the police review board.
Yep.
The opposition that I heard from most people was not because he was a felon. It was because of the extent and the gravity of what action was actually taken. So I just want to say that's not what this conversation's about.
Right.
This conversation is about the fact that a lot of people who have a felony on their record or a deep criminal background kind of wear a scarlet letter on their chest.
Right.
And how do you think that affects people's abilities to get off the streets? And what do you think that we could be doing as a society to help fix that? Because if that is a problem with homelessness and we're not fixing it, then it's going to continue being a problem.
So you're dead on correct. And again, I appreciate the fact that you flagged the gravity issue. So we're not trying to solve the outliers here, right? We're not trying to solve the really horrific crimes of certain instances and situations.
Yeah.
But we're just talking about run-of-the-mill stuff, right? People with, assault twos, which is actually pretty violent, and I don't want to diminish that. But, people with simple assaults, people with, drug convictions, that's another good example in that sort of
just
stuff.
To touch on that, right? Because at least for me, and I'm open to being, wrong. But if you murder someone in cold blood, premeditated murder, that's very different than the kid who was playing around with a gun drunk and accidentally killed one of his friends, which I also know have happened to someone that I knew, which also that's horrible. Right. But it's also, that's a very different thing than a premeditated.
Circumstances matter, right? I think we agree with
felonies,
that. Yeah.
One of them was who you are as a human is kind of flawed, whereas the other one, you just screwed up big time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so,
circumstances, intent matters.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of categorize this as the run-of-the-mill stuff, like you flagged right there. It is one of the biggest barriers to housing that we have ever worked with. It's
jobs.
Jobs. Yeah, I would say both of those too. I think it was worse in the past than it is at the moment. I think increasingly landlords and insurers and everybody that we work with, because there have been so many people incarcerated across America over the last 50 years, have gotten a little bit more, I don't like this word, but a little bit more liberalized in the way that they're interpreting some of these things. But, historically, having a recent felony on your record was the single biggest disqualifier for housing of any kind. Now, sex offenders are obviously historically the hardest to house, people on the registry. But even that has been easier in recent years. We have managed to successfully house people on the registry in recent years. The one unforgivable sin in housing isn't murder or any of those other things. It's arson. I have never, in more than a decade, successfully housed an arsonist. Because landlords, they look at that and they're like, I'm not going to take that risk, right? I've got other people in this apartment complex. I'm not going to. I had one client that I interviewed over at PCC.
That's interesting because when you look at the gravity of the sin overall,
right?
Versus
because it's on the side. The risk is being analyzed on the landlord's side. They're not really interpreting what the gravity or the moral value.
When you think about it.
It does. Yeah. It does. One of the hardest situations I ever had was a client I interviewed at PCC 10 years ago who said to me, because I was going through my stick and I said, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, what was it? And he said, arson. And my heart just kind of dropped because I almost knew at the moment I wasn't going to be able to help this fellow. And I said, okay, well, when were you convicted? And he said, which time? He had 3 arsons on his record.
I got 3 arsons, you're out policy.
And so I tell you, that was a difficult one, right? But
how do you do 3 arsons? That's
mental health,
arsons.
behavioral, it just happens. but he would have been better off if he committed a much more, in mind and way, your way of thinking about that. Yeah.
That's a lot of arson.
It's a lot of arson. Yeah. But to the point, having a criminal conviction on your record makes it very difficult to house you. So it's just one more barrier we have to get over. And so I would say, and I don't know if DJ would agree, but probably our most important relationships are with the business community generally, especially the landlord community, because those relationships evolve over a decade and there's trust back and forth. And they know we're going to give them people that will be successful, right? And we're going to give them case management to go along beside that so that they have frequent check-ins with the service provider to help them, transition into housing. But, I would say that criminal convictions are probably worse than addiction issues historically when it comes to, and a lot of times they're paired up, obviously. But
so, what policy changes would there be to help address that?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for teeing this up. And it's sad that it took us this long to get here.
I'm thinking a longer ahead, very far ahead of what I'm doing right now. Because I really am focused on. I don't have like a wife or kids, so I have plenty of time to work.
Right.
And so while I spend a majority of my time on Salem and the Salem Business Journal, I'm also looking at other areas. And the reason why that's important, like we just launched the Political Center about 2 weeks ago. I
saw that.
Right.
Because a lot of people have been coming to me asking me to address statewide issues.
Right.
But what I'm trying to do is stay true to my scope of what we're doing. And it'll help me separate SBJ from politics. Because SBJ is very issue focused and business focused. But we've been wrapped into politics every now and then more than I would like to be. Because
well, that's curious because I think people out there have a strong connection between SBJ and the Marion Polk First PAC. I think that I've heard that there was alignment there.
Well, there was originally. I think, this is not getting published.
Okay,
but my my old business partner was very strongly tied. With him, but I bought him out last January, and to be completely blunt between us, I'm not the biggest fan of them.
All right.
Kick rocks.
Well, I mean, I think that may have been the connection because that person was connected to the chamber and then when connected to that. So that makes sense.
Yeah, so he was very much tied. In fact, that was one of the big things that when I bought him out, that's one of the big reasons why was because there was an article written about the previous mayor about him defaulting on his home that I didn't agree with the way it was done. It is news. It was worth doing. It's just
any elected official is going to
have the opportunity to say it.
Right.
His stuff. And so I'm a big believer of giving when I did a story on RJ Navarro recently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was
I know the story.
Him or his employee are potentially committing fraud. We don't know who yet. And he's still mad at me for it. And I was like, dude, I was way nicer to you than I should have been. But because there's a lot of stuff that he was also knowing that I didn't publish that were not okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't because the goal wasn't to tear him down.
But you were covering the newsworthy pieces of it.
And so, I don't know, other stuff might be just really, to be honest. My goal isn't to tear him down. My goal is just to address that one issue.
All right, I'm with you.
Yeah. And so, but even then, I called him ahead of time. Hey, here's what I'm writing. Is there anything wrong? Is there anything? Do you have some? Because if you tell me something that gives me a reason to change what I'm writing, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And, he didn't.
Well,
anyway, so that's
I deal with a lot of media across the state, and that, that sort of calling heads up is, no one can ask for more than that level of engagement. Right. Yeah. So here's what I'm writing. Do you have any thoughts on this? Maybe change my mind about it. Right. So that's fair.
Yeah. Well, and my issue with Marion Polk First, right, is I don't like I have an issue with the Right to Life group. That's who I have an issue with.
Okay.
Because
But they're connected to that? Yeah.
That's why it was started, because people don't like that people were receiving money from Right to Life. So Right to Life gives it to Marion Polk, who then funnels it to people to make it look as if it's not Right to Life, but really it's Right to Life.
That's interesting, because the story I heard was that that PAC wasn't happy with the chamber's political advocacy and wanted them to be more aggressive, and the chamber was, more, maybe both of that. Yeah.
Well, there's another group.
There is.
Yeah, that's why they started was because
maybe I'm mixing stories in.
Yeah, because there's a new group that just started.
Okay.
That he announced it on my podcast actually, and they're a group of business owners, not associated, not Marion Polk First. These are just business owners who wanted to fund pro-business policies.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah. So the chamber is they're kind of like Young Life. In fact, I view
I know.
I view my business kind of like Young Life. To be honest, I don't care where you are. I don't care if you're a socialist. We still love you and we'll work with you. That's how the chamber kind of operates. And this group really wants to operate as far as very pro-business policies only. If that makes sense. So it's like,
so they're more narrow in that sense.
Yeah. Marion Polk First, I think, is just like a right wing. It's like they're progressive Salem,
right?
Because there's progressive.
Well, they're a response to progressive Salem in a lot of ways. It looks like they're pushing Republican candidates, basically.
Correct. Yeah. Which I mean,
it's fine.
Cool. Yeah. I actually am a strong believer of I want both parties to have the best candidates ever. That's why, like, even when I was a Republican, and this stays, in this room, this isn't being published. Like, even when I was a Republican when I was younger, that I left the party because there's dumb. I became an independent because my tribe wanted me to be. And that's why, like, I focus more on becoming a leader as opposed to a person with a party. Yeah. Because then I can be more effective. But they were running even when I was a Republican, they kept running some schmuck against Paul Evans in West Salem. He was an idiot.
I couldn't remember.
But people kept like trying to get. They're like, I hate it when both sides do this. They'll like recruit someone to run against someone who's actually like, you don't agree with them on policy, but they're good at their job. And like, I don't agree with a lot of policies, but like he's actually my friend. He was my professor.
Paul, yeah.
In fact, he was my communications professor at Shemeketa while he was helping my opponent with his campaign. Just back, and which made me way better because he was hard on me.
Yeah,
but my point of that was I don't like when you run someone who's clearly not the better candidate, but you're trying to push them because you want your party to win.
Right.
I think that's so dumb.
Yeah.
And Marion Polk's really good at that. So
all right. Well, thank you for framing that up. I appreciate that. That helps.
All right, Jesse, I want to talk about, the consequences of felonies and how they follow people. Are you ready for that?
Oh, I'm ready for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was one of the big things I learned through Portland State as I started this work for helping folks in poverty is the fact that, that they make an infraction. They have behavior that needs addressed. It needs accountability. Yeah. And the system is supposed to hold them accountable. But then the felony part of that label is actually hurting all of us. Yeah. It is hurting the whole community because there are over 2,000 statutory restrictions in the state of Oregon on a person with a felony. So that as a second chance employer who is passionate about giving people second chances, if someone has a felony, they can't work at our family site. If someone has a felony, they can't drive for us. If someone has a felony, they can't work. Dangerous. They can't work on the safety team because our safety team is DPSST certified by the state. Yeah. Their world gets so small, even for an organization that prides itself in being a second chance employer. So imagine all the barriers, the insurance barriers. Insurance is a huge player in this world of incarceration and felonies. And if you want to talk about, a complex, it is, the incarceration of our population and how many people are benefiting and making money off of incarceration. And so we have all these barriers we have to navigate even as a second chance employer. And then we start working with our unsheltered participants, and it is just barrier after barrier. And kudos to the work that Community Action has done with the launching of these clear clinics that help people who will do the work and get the references and get their past expunged, so that we can, make more things happen for them. And the last thing I'll say is, as Church of the Park, like, if we see a challenge, we want to get like right in the middle of it. So we can't find a housing location for people with arson. Therefore, we're going to partner with industry and like literally build those little cottages. So they're not going to be placed in apartments. They're going to be cottages, and we're going to be intentional about, okay, these are some of the hardest to house. Yeah. So we are going to be the property manager and try to say yes to them, because what else are we going to do? Are we going to throw those people away? Do they have to live on the sidewalk? Can they only live in a shelter?
Yeah. Well, and that's a hard one to, like, as a society, right? That's not a you problem. That's a us as a society problem. how do we deal with arsonists? Are we just never going to house them?
No, we want to make it our problem. Yeah. I'm saying, like, if we see a problem and we're like, oh, no one's touching that, it's like, well, then why not us?
Yeah. Well, and my response to that, right, is it shouldn't have to be you.
Right.
It should be, they should be able to find housing. Yeah. But like the question becomes, how do we as a society choose to handle that? Right. Just like with felonies, people with felonies on their record, what do we need to do to, because like, I don't know, that's something that like as a culture, we really got to address. Yeah. How many people in your shelters do you think have felonies or deep criminal records?
Well, I could tell you a more positive number that like just in the last 3 months, 16 people in our shelter got their felonies expunged.
That's cool. Yeah. Okay, here's another thing on that though. It's so expensive for someone to be able to get their records expunged. I know several people who might not meet the requirements, and it might have changed, since then. It's been a couple years, but it's like you've already paid your dues to society. You served your time. Why do we charge people to get their records expunged? That's my question. Because we lock them up already. You're already getting punished. Why is there also a financial barrier after it's already done and over with? You already paid your fees, right? They already paid fees to the court. They're already paying time in jail.
Yeah.
And then when they get done, they have to do it over again. And so I don't know. I just think that that I honestly believe that the expungement shouldn't be a money cost. It should be a time cost of you being a regular human in society. But I've seen that financial barrier become a problem for so many people because then their records not expunged because they're not good. Their records not expunged because they're poor.
Good.
That's why I have a problem with it.
And that's exactly what's happening. So I'll start with the end of that conversation and work my way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
But like DJ, we're a second chance employer. We also run a small reentry project for the last 15 years. We work on expungement for folks who are interested in looking into that. We haven't quite yet found a way to provide all the financial assistance we need to connect people to that sort of thing, but we're helping them with a whole variety of volunteer resources as best we can. And it's been very popular and very successful. We certainly believed in lived experience. We also believe in second chance opportunities, and that's just a core part of our DNA and our identity. But I think, Jesse, to your point, the problem isn't so much in the record itself. The problem isn't so much in what agencies are doing and not doing to address it. The problem is really in all of us, in the sense that are we viewing this person as a kind of throwaway person, as DJ mentioned a moment ago, in the sense that we've looked at them and concluded you can make no more meaningful contribution to society. There is no value that you can bring to the community and to the broader health of the Commonwealth, so to speak. So therefore, we're going to make it impossible for you to seek safety. We're going to make it impossible for you to participate. We're going to make it impossible or very difficult for you to even live in certain cases. So we got caught up in this sort of judgment that folks who've been exited from incarceration are still in need of additional punishment, and additional shaming, and additional ostracism. And, that's a sort of evolutionary change within ourselves. The same as you were reflecting on that moment when you passed the homeless person on the sidewalk. It's the same thing with the rest of us, right? When we observe folks like that, we have to be very mindful that, we have a commitment to the idea that once, as you said, people have served their time, we need to give them the opportunity to be meaningful citizens again.
How do we do that?
Well, we need to start with two things. One, so in the credit of the legislature, there's been a lot of positive changes on this front in the last 5 years. We have seen it easier for people with criminal background issues to get housed. We've seen it easier for them to get jobs. So we have made positive public policy changes. So I think that trend needs to continue where it makes sense. The second thing is, to some extent, I don't know, again, I'm nearly 60 years of age, and I think the most meaningful change in America in my lifetime has been the emergence of modern communication technology. I think there's nothing that has had the same level of impact, but it has inundated with us with a great degree of rage generation by people who are trying to manipulate opinions in America, turn poor people against poor people sometimes. So I think we're going to have to get a little bit more sophisticated about how we look at the messages that, are being pushed onto us on a day-to-day basis about how we should fear our neighbors and how we should continue to do everything we can to punish others, even when it doesn't make any sense anymore. So I think the change that needs to happen there comes within us more than, what government can and cannot do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're on a better path than we've ever been in terms of, as a community, saying yes to second chance employment and just owning it that these folks did make a mistake and they're literally choosing to engage in this new and healthy way. And I believe you get more of what you celebrate. So this is an area where I want to say our community celebrates second chance employment. They celebrate reentry. And so we're on a good path, and we can celebrate clear clinics, and we can celebrate the changing of policies and not be trying to punish people more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I guess we'll see where we go from here. Yeah. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
No, I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to come and talk about the work. It's so complex, and there's a lot of things going on. And like you said, there's a lot of things about it that are working well, but also a lot of things that just don't make a whole lot of sense sometimes, especially that core issue you identified very early on. We are putting more money into this than ever before, the public's dollar. And yet it feels like the homeless situation continues, the homeless crisis continues to get worse. Yeah. So there has to be questions and answers about that, right? So anytime we have the opportunity to speak to the public, we really enjoy and are thankful for that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for the discussion, the fairness of it, how we've really been able to engage and talk about, again, what the difference is between prevention that we as a community are all in, and the interventions that we've empowered some to do. And it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, well, no, I agree. Thank you guys for being willing to have it, because, and here's the, kind of the tough space that we operate in, right? Is like, and then for the SBJ, like, we have to talk about like a lot of hard issues that other people aren't willing to talk about, and then balance, how can I do that in a way that's healthy,
right,
and good? And, it's a tough balance. I don't get it right all the time, but we try. And, I would like to do, if you guys are both willing to come back again sometime.
Oh, I am.
I'm trying to do a whole series on, I think, homelessness as a whole.
Good.
Because the first one was the end of the river and talking about Church of the Park specifically.
Good.
This one's great because we got to talk about a lot of the things that don't have to do with the taking people out of the river, but it has to do with the problems leading to them going in.
Good. And
then I'm sure, that if there's any flaws or any issues with this, we will hear all about them.
I'm sure you will too.
All right.
So what would be great is to maybe see, okay, well, what do people want us to talk about next?
Right.
And then maybe take the next one in that direction specifically. So it might not be, 2 hours? But the next one would be a lot shorter, because we'll talk about like one specific thing.
Some people might have questions about why the river exists at all. And, in that analogy. So,
gosh,
you like philosophizing.
You know what that was?
Yeah.
You know what you just did right there?
What's that?
Have you seen those, the TikToks where like it shows like a person like on the ground and it's like their hand flicks and it says Michael Bay?
Yes. Yeah. No, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
People are like, oh, there's going to be a sequel.
There's going to be a
there
sequel.
We go. Yeah. The hero's not dead. Anyways, thank you guys for coming. Thank you so much to Hotel Salem and Compass Visuals for sponsoring the podcast, and see you guys next time.